Hey folks, welcome to this mini booth gathering. It's good to be with you. I know this format is pretty much a one-way street. There's no real way for you to interact with either the presenter or the content, but I have a couple of questions anyway. Here's the first one. How did you feel about being in lockdown? Or, and I hope this isn't the case, but if it is, how do you feel if you're still in lockdown about being in lockdown? And this is more what I hope you're experiencing personally. How do you feel about re-engagement, about moving out of lockdown and back into the kind of wider world again? I'm recording this particular video early in May 2020 in Winnipeg, and what's happening here right now is that city and provincial officials are starting to loosen the strictures on lockdown. They're starting to find ways to reopen some businesses and kind of permissioning a little more freedom of movement with conditions. As with the pandemic itself, not everybody feels the same about this. And how differently we feel about it seems to be rooted in the same emotion as our differences of feeling about the pandemic itself. It seems to be rooted primarily and most often in the emotion of fear, how fearful we are and how we're dealing with that sense of being afraid. There's an interesting post-resurrection story in John chapter 20 that's about this stuff. It's about things like lockdown, about things like fear, about things like moving forward and how we do that. And as John tells the story, it has been a busy day. Mary Magdalene has been out to the tomb early in the morning. She's discovered that the stone is rolled away. That's not good news. She runs to get the disciples. Peter and John run up there. They discover not only is the stone rolled away, but when they stop and look in, the body is gone. And so I mean, as we can imagine, Mary is devastated. As far as she can figure out, someone has taken the body of her beloved Jesus. And we know in all kinds of ways that not having a body when we're trying to grieve and bring closure to grief makes it much more complicated. She is full of grief and confusion. And no surprise, her life is in upheaval because the story that she thought she was living in has taken this enormous and unanticipated turn. And she is so convinced, in fact, that the future is in disarray that when Jesus appears to her in the present under those circumstances, she thinks he's the gardener. She thinks he's the caretaker of the garden that she's in. She literally can't see him because she can't imagine that he would be present to her under those circumstances. And it's when Jesus speaks to her in a personal, loving, direct way that she finally recognizes him. And then she really freaks out and she runs to tell the disciples. The disciples, meanwhile, are in lockdown. They are terrified. They're afraid of the present. They are afraid of the future. They are behind closed doors. Their plans are in disarray. Any sense that they had that the future was looking bright, that things were going to get better going forward, that's all in tatters. And in fact, they are so afraid of stepping outdoors that they're convinced that it might be the death of them if they do. But Jesus, who is just full of surprises, shows up despite the locked doors, and apparently not inclined to suddenly switch to predictable behavior. The first thing he does when he comes into that room full of terrified, anxious people is he wishes them peace. And he seems so determined that they would experience peace in the middle of these circumstances that during what John describes as a really quite short visit, he wishes them peace twice. That's interesting in itself. But something else happens in between those two wishes for peace that turn them from something other than wishes. It turn them into something that's more like an action plan, really. They show a path to peacemaking under those kind of circumstances. And that's where I think the kind of the applicability really kicks in. Most of us not being equipped to, show up suddenly in locked rooms, for instance. Anyway, what happens in between those two wishes for peace, as John tells the story, is that Jesus shows those anxious people the wounds of love. And John says it's when he shows them how he loves them that they recognize who he is, that they know who they're in the presence of. In 1 John 4:18, the writer reminds us that love dispels fear. It's love in the story that we were just thinking about here, that I just told from John. It's love that unlocks the imagination of Mary and the disciples to see that Jesus, love personified, is present even in the midst of the most unsettling things that have ever happened to them, things that were more unsettling perhaps than anything they ever imagined could happen to them. Now that is something that we can take up for ourselves. That's something that we can imitate. That's a path that we can walk. And here's a couple of ways to think about that. I think the first thing we can do is that we can choose to kind of get our heads up, and I'm not saying this is easy, but I think it is attainable. It's something we can at least aspire to and move toward. We can get our heads up out of above the horizon line of our circumstances. And what we're looking for when we get our eyes up is we're looking for the presence of that trustable, life-giving love that Jesus brings into that room. We are looking for the presence of that love even in the midst of things like lockdowns and transitions and uncertainty and change. That's the first thing. The second thing that we can do is we can share that kind of love with others. And we can do it basically in the same way that Jesus did with Mary. We can do it by calling them by name, by interacting with people in whatever way is available to us in a way that says directly and personally, I know you. I know your story. I know your name. I have you in my mind and my heart, in my thoughts, in my prayers, in my life, as well as I can under these circumstances. And as much as I can under these circumstances, I'm with you in yours. Mary. Find a way to call the person you love by name and let them know that you're thinking of them. We can do that. Now, I know that we don't all think of ourselves as prayers, and in light of that, I want to offer a prayer, and I want to do it in a way that can either be taken up by you if you think of yourself as one who prays and you wish to pray it for yourself, or if you don't, then I hope you can just receive this as a gift. And if it doesn't feel like a gift, then don't pick it up. It'll be gift to you when it's time, should that time come. But I'm going to pray it out loud for us all at the end of this. And then what I'll do when I'm done with the video is I'll put the words up on the screen. And that way, if you want to take them down or pray it for yourself, you'll have the words to guide you. And we can pray together. All right? Here we go. Spirit of peace, quiet our hearts. Heal our anxious thoughts. Free us from our fretful ways. Breathe on us your holy calm, so that in the stillness of your presence, we may open ourselves to trust and be transformed. Amen. It's been good to be with you. Peace to you all. Bye for now.